More details are emerging about the Obama administration's plan for the most sweeping regulatory overhaul since the Great Depression. People familiar with the matter tell Bloomberg the Fed will likely emerge as the so-called systemic risk regulator, supervising any firm that's regarded as too big to fail. The Fed would also retain its authority over bank holding companies and state-chartered banks. But a new consumer protection agency would take over responsibilities for issues related to credit cards, mortgages, and financial education. The Obama administration plan will face intense scrutiny in Congress, especially among lawmakers skeptical about how much power the Fed already has. What does a former congressman who co-authored the landmark Sarbanes-Oxley Act think about the administration's regulatory reform plans? Joining us now is Michael Oxley, former chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. He's currently a senior advisor to the board of the NASDAQ OMX Group and of counsel to the Baker Hostetler law firm. Mr. Oxley, welcome to Bloomberg News.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Congressman, next week, Treasury Secretary Geithner is expected to appear before congressional panels. He'll be back on the Hill. He's going to talk about the administration's plans for financial regulatory reform. What type of reform do you think is needed right now?
Well, of course, this is just the beginning of the process. A lot of rumors going around about what the administration will propose, and the old adage about the administration proposes and the Congress disposes will be the same case here. But I suspect the major portion of it will be, or at least the beginning process will be, to try to set up a systemic, what I would call an overseer as opposed to necessarily a regulator. And whether that's the Fed or some combination of the Fed and some kind of a council, I think is probably inevitable and a good idea. I think you need some entity to take a look at risk assumption at 30,000 feet. Something we haven't had in the past, and with the changes that have taken place with technology and trading and so forth,
right,
we really do need a 21st century apparatus to go forward.
And in some instances, some circles, they're calling this an Uber regulator. Is this something whose time has finally come? Why did it take so long?
Well, of course, you don't get the kind of reform that you need until you have a dire situation. But we didn't get Sarbanes-Oxley as a result of nothing happening. It was the Enron, the WorldCom, and the meltdown in the markets. Same kind of thing here that drove the process. And so this will be the first time in 75 or plus years that that the Congress administration need to get together and form this 21st century regulatory function. I do think, though, however, that it ought to be the systemic entity ought to be an overseer as opposed to a regulator. I think it's important that we make sure we have functional regulation, and that the overseer, once the overseer spots a particular problem, hands that off then to that particularly specific regulator,
right,
to make certain that the issue is resolved.
And Mr. Oxley, it strikes me you say that because something that Lawrence Summers said today, he was speaking to the Council of Foreign Relations here in New York. He said that history teaches that once the crisis passes, the will to reform passes as well. In your opinion, this is something that needs to be done right now?
Well, it needs to be done, and I think the earlier, obviously, the better, because obviously memories fade, and if the market starts to recover, it will take a lot of the emphasis and the steam out of the reform effort. I think the administration understands that. My sense is, though, because of big issues like health care and energy, that this is probably at best in third place in terms of priorities. And I think that potentially bodes for a lengthy effort, essentially going into next year, possibly.
Mr. Oxley, is this just a matter of better enforcement of current rules?
To some extent it is, but on the other hand, you had the situations at AIG, for example, where a lot of this activity took place outside of the traditionally regulated areas. And so we're going to have to address those new realities in different forms of legislation and regulation. And that's going to be very dicey and very difficult, but I think it's important that we do that.
Sir, in our remaining couple of seconds, you were in Congress. You know sometimes the wheels of change spin very, very slowly, and I'm probably being kind. What would you suggest that Congress do right now? What's their role in this?
Well, Congress obviously has to basically enact most of this to make it happen. The administration can only do so much. But the whole restructuring, if they're talking about a serious restructuring of the entire regulatory structure, taking into account anomalies like state regulation of insurance versus federal charters,
right.
This is a big operation. The longer they wait, the more difficult it is to get a consensus and to get pressure from the public.
Right.
And I think that's the dilemma that they face.
Former Congressman Michael Oxley joining us from Washington. Congressman, thanks for your views. We